The Order 1886 is beautiful. The Order 1886 is cinematic. And the Order 1886 is really zoomed in. Like, I can't see what I'm shooting at over here. But is the Order 1886 worth playing? Well, according to the reviews, the answer is pretty much no. Despite the amazing visuals that are still very impressive today, the game was widely criticized for being too short, for feeling on rails, and for lacking inspiration when it comes to gameplay. And it was seen in many ways as a bit of a tech demo, or a proof of concept for the PlayStation 4, rather than a fully realized game. But how can that actually be? An alternate history, third-person narrative with futuristic steampunk weapons handcrafted by Nikola Tesla? Knights of a mysterious order fighting on blimps? Fighting frickin' werewolves? How could this not be the perfect formula for a hit? I remember when I saw those initial teasers for this game, I was so hyped. I mean, this game looks like a Naughty Dog caliber game. Third person, over the shoulder, action, shooting, narrative. I couldn't believe that it would be so bad. Unfortunately though, for me, I listened to the critics and I passed on this game. It probably was the right choice at the time, given a steep $60 price tag, which didn't really seem worth it for having such a small experience. But the prospect of this game and how amazing and hype I was for it has never left me and has been itching at me for all these years. So when I saw this game on sale, I had to see for myself, is the Order 1886 really that bad? Dr. Pooplove here, and today I am going to do a deep dive into developer Ready at Dawn's 2015 third-person narrative shooter, The Order 1886. We will talk about the story, the characters, and the gameplay. We'll analyze the good and the bad, and even what the prospects look like for a potential sequel. And ultimately, we will find where this game belongs on the ultimate video game tier list. So, without further ado, grab yourself a drink.
Leonard! A drink! A drink, goddammit you!
As we go back in time to 19th century Victoria, England, let's get right into it. Now, the game starts in an interesting place. It starts with you being brutally tortured over and over again. It's a repeated task, and it's in first person, so it does kind of feel a little bit more immersive, which does help give you that brutal feeling. Eventually though, you are given some control of your character through a QuickTime button press, where you are able to overcome your assailants. Now, I do like how this game starts in that you don't really know what's going on. You're captured, you're a prisoner, and you're only going to slowly piece together what exactly is going on. It creates the mystery that can be an effective way to hook you. But so begins your escape from prison, where you are given control to move your character. Now you're beaten and you're bruised, and it's slow moving. And this is kind of the expected section of any game where you start to get the controls slowly introduced to you. Things like moving and, well, okay, it's mostly just moving in this section, as well as some QuickTime events. Now, something I picked up on right away was the influence of Naughty Dog games like Uncharted and The Last of Us with The Order. Like, the section where you are weak and struggling to move reminds me of the section in The Last of Us where Joel gets impaled and has to crawl his way out of the university. And even some of the QuickTime events where you're holding triangle or mashing the X button, these are things that they do a ton in Naughty Dog games. But I was also surprised to find that this game might have inspired Naughty Dog as well. Like, there's this part where you pick up this revolver and you get to look at it, examining it from different angles, and that's something we've seen in a lot of Naughty Dog games that came out during the PS4 generation, which were all after this game came out. And it's honestly not surprising because this is a PlayStation published game, and the developers at Ready at Dawn had worked with PlayStation a lot. They made some God of War games, and they even made the game Daxter based on Naughty Dog's Jak and Daxter series. They also received help by God of War developers Sony Santa Monica with The Order 1866, the same team who went on to make God of War 2018, which transformed that franchise into a similarly cinematic, over-the-shoulder third-person narrative. Now, with especially the success of The Last of Us, many AAA developers sought to make their own gritty, story-driven third-person narratives, and Ready at Dawn with The Order 1866 was no exception. There are plenty of other moments that seem very strongly influenced by Naughty Dog, and we will call those out as they come throughout this game. But moving on, and one thing you will probably notice just as starkly as I did if you play this game is that while you are given control of the character, it is very often interrupted with a cutscene. Now, one thing is, these cutscenes are seamless, which is very impressive at the time. I don't really think that many games were achieving this at this time. Even Naughty Dog, who had been considered best in class for this type of thing, did not achieve seamless transitions until Uncharted 4, which came out 1 year later. And so this aspect has been impressive, but I will say at this point, the game seems to be very hesitant to give me much control over the character, something which I think will make it hard for people to pick up and play and enjoy right away. It's often necessary to get through these intro sections, and they go slowly before getting to some of the action, but usually you do get a little bit more control, and honestly, you are usually introduced to at least some of the basic mechanics like shooting and fighting mechanics. But I guess in this game's defense, walking and quick time button presses are introduced, and these are some of the major mechanics. So perhaps that is why. At this point though, I am just eager to start shooting things with future tech weapons. We will get there eventually. But first, we have to escape from the Order. We capture the guard, we go up the elevator, and at the last second, we jump off the bridge.
Hands where I can see them! The play is over, Galahad. Surrender yourself!
Raise your hands now!
Raise your hands!
Hands up!
Gray,
Don't do this!
I said surrender!
Hands on your head!
You have betrayed our order! No one may escape the penalty! You forget, Lord Chancellor. I'm as good as dead already.
Galahad!
Before we find out what happens, we are brought to a flashback to the past where we see our protagonist, Galahad, properly healthy looking and very much embedded as a knight in the Order. And what this opening section manages to do from a story perspective is it manages to create intrigue. I now know something bad is going to go down with the Order and Galahad, and now I want to know how that happens. Now the view of London is gorgeous, and I seem to finally be given some real control over the character, but it is limited to this slow walking, and you do have to slowly walk throughout the entire building here. You do get to check out documents and pictures, very much in a similar fashion to Naughty Dog games, where you can flip them around and look at them. But overall, the moving is frustratingly slow. Like if I make a wrong turn, I gotta slow walk all the way back. There's also audio logs as well with these phonographic cylinders. And this one gives us a little intro to Lady Ingrid, which we will meet in a bit. Now, for our first bit of action here, and it's honestly a bit frustrating. I can see I'm about to do an Uncharted-like jump, and I'm excited for it. But after I jump, rather than keeping me in control, the game switches to a cutscene to finish off the rest of it. Now, this does become a problem for me throughout the game, as major aspects of action are actually taken out of your control and brought into a cutscene. It's not all the action and not all the climbing, but it can be a bummer when you see something you are so used to doing in so many games on your own, but here they are trying to hold your hand. Now that we've made it down into the streets of London, we are able to explore some of the shops and the stalls, and we meet up with Lady Ingrid. And now you can finally get a sense that you're actually going to be going on some sort of a mission and that you're going to be seeing some real action. The things that I've been waiting so desperately to play in this game. The cool stuff that I saw in those initial trailers. But first, we need to do a little bit more. slow walking, which eventually will turn into some light jogging and a couple of cutscenes here and there. But look, I can smell the action. It's coming soon. Especially now we're going down into this tunnel. I can smell it. But first we have to go up the stairs, do a little bit more following of Lady Ingrid. But now, finally, we can take some cover. There's some hooligans running around, and so they give us a gun, and we can finally begin firing. Now, there has been a wait, and it has been a little bit frustrating, but to be honest, we are now in for a pretty long sequence of action where you kind of roam from room to room, doing a lot of firing. You start off with some short firearms, and eventually you get some long firearms, and you learn some new mechanics and how everything works. And honestly, I had a good deal of fun in this. But one thing you do notice, especially when firing, and this is very much a cover-based shooter, one thing you notice is the cover and how much it blocks your view and your ability to see above and around it in order to find where the enemies are to get them. One of the parts that is making it harder is the fact that you are playing on a widescreen format where you have the black bars on the top and the bottom. And yes, it's cool. You get to see a very wide angle of this game, but you don't really have much height, especially when you're in cover. You just can't see that much above it, and you're very much zoomed in. The FOV is kind of zoomed in on your character such that him and any cover that he's around is really blocking a lot of your view. It can make this game very frustrating. It's really hard to kind of pre-aim your gun and shoot out without knowing where your reticle is going to land. And so while I do think the gunplay is fun and I enjoy shooting these guns, the cover-based system is just a little bit too distracting and daunting. One thing it does is it actually makes me want to not utilize the cover. But the problem is that when you do that, you end up getting hurt pretty badly because you're exposing yourself to enemy fire. So you kind of end up in this difficult choice where you basically have to decide to go into cover and look for angles and ways to just pop out and fire. When you do pop out, you do have a pretty good view and angle, but you're not really able to pre-plan it. So sometimes you end up popping out of cover and having to do a lot of readjusting to your aim to get on the enemies. It's something that doesn't quite get better throughout the rest of this game. It's something that you kind of have to learn to play around. And look, the gunplay is fun, but it's definitely something here where I wonder how they could not pick this up when doing QA testing or anything like that. Like, this must have been a frustration for many people playing this game. I don't see why they didn't fix this. I even don't understand why after the game came out they didn't patch this in any way. But either way, we're fighting through this section. We even get a smoke bomb, and you get to see how grenade throwing works. And another thing is you get to see how damage is dealt. So when you do have a white hit marker, it means that you are dealing damage, and when you finally get a red hit marker, that means that you have finally killed your target. Another thing to notice here is that a lot of this game is operating in a similar fashion to Uncharted. Of course, it is cover-based shooter, although Uncharted lets you see over that cover, but it also has similar things where you are picking up guns off of the enemies that you killed. You're able to kind of swap them back and forth and get to pick what you like to play as. Now, what's funny about this though is that you are a part of the Order, which makes some of these very futuristic, high-powered guns, and so you're actually opting to switch a very well-designed gun for some random hooligan's gun off the floor. That part doesn't make a ton of sense. I do wish it operated a little bit more like The Last of Us, where you have an arsenal of guns that you're able to upgrade and use with special abilities and effects. I do think this was kind of a missed opportunity, especially with one of the main draws being, hey, we get to use some of these future high-powered, steam-powered guns. Like, that is one of the things that really draws you to this game, but you see the floor littered with a bunch of more basic, realistic guns like rifles and shotguns that you would expect. And so I do think that's a bit of a missed opportunity. We get through a little bit of these sections, and there's a small scene with Sir Galahad and Lady Ingrid, and you can detect that there's a little bit of sexual tension between these two. There's a bit of a will they, won't they vibe going on, and it's kind of interesting how this ends up turning out. But this section also introduces you a little bit more to stealth elements where you do get to have, again, some similar moves to what you would expect from Uncharted, like pulling someone over a counter space and taking them down, or doing a behind the back cinematic takedown. And you also get introduced to this other mechanic called Black Sight, which is similar to what you would see in Red Dead Redemption, where you get to slow down time and kind of take your time with your shots in this bullet time slow-mo fashion. Now, I'll be honest, they introduced this to me in this section, but because of a lot of the other mechanics, the kind of weird one-off mechanics that this game introduces from time to time throughout it, I ultimately forgot that this is actually something you can use. In fact, I don't think I ever used this mechanic again throughout the game, even though they indicate that it's something available to me. And now look, perhaps that's my bad for not noticing, for not paying enough attention, but I also think it's a little bit of the fault of the game design, as it does continue to introduce these new mechanics that are kind of sparingly used so little often that I kind of forget they're available to me. And something like this, I think, even though it was available to me after this initial tutorial, it would have been nice for them to do more to maybe force me to use this so that I remember that it's actually available. There are other types of mechanics like this throughout this game that you kind of just end up forgetting are there, and we'll get to those, but ultimately this is a cool mechanic that I definitely wish I took more advantage of. Okay, so after fighting through these sections, this is where we meet the character, General Lafayette, who is a Frenchman, and he's very much a stereotypical womanizer, romantic type. And we actually catch him in the act.
Ah, monsieur, this lady requires my attention.
Marquis, your attention is required elsewhere.
I assure you, mademoiselle, that only the vow of fidelity prevents me from accepting your invitation.
Oh, Marquis, you mustn't leave now.
Unfortunately, my lady, my duty compels me elsewhere.
Now from here, you also get some hints as to what the Order is actually doing. Galahad says they do not fight men, they fight half-breeds. And so we're going to find out what that means very soon. The trio begins to go down into the tunnels, and this is where we actually get some light climbing sections, similar again to what you would see with Uncharted, with even some traversal across the gaps. Now, what would be nice here is in these climbing sections is if the camera would zoom out a little bit to give you a little bit of a wider FOV, but you're very much zoomed in here, so you can't really always tell where you're supposed to be climbing. But we get through this section, and this is where we find our first half-breed or lichen or kind of werewolf type character. Now, fighting these guys is very scary because they come right after you and they attack you, and they're very easy to hurt you. But there is kind of an easy, cheesy kind of way to handle these guys, and that's basically how I did it. All you really have to do is stand in one corner of the room that you're facing these guys off on so that you have your back covered, and you basically wait for them to run at you, firing a bit at them as they head towards you, but being ready to spam the X button to dodge as it becomes available and as they start attacking you. This allows you to dodge them, and as they are running away, you can continue firing at them. You basically just repeat this process until they are down and ready to be finished off. At this point, you get to chase down the last of these lichens, who ends up getting away into the street, into the public. And this is a pretty cool chase sequence where you get to obtain an arc gun, a cool future tech weapon which you can charge up and release to fire. Now, as cool as this gun is, they don't really let you use this gun very much or very often throughout the game. And it is a bit frustrating as even in this section, you only really get to fire it a few times. And you basically have to fire it according to how they want you to in order to let the story continue in the fashion they want. Otherwise, you fail. This is an ongoing theme of this game, having something be very sick and sweet, but having the developers kind of hold you back on how much they let you actually do with it. Now we take down this last Lycan, and this is where we meet Sir Percival, sort of the leader or the mentor of this little band of the Order. And they talk about their desire to take some active steps to handle and contain the situation that just occurred in the streets. So they decide to bring this up at the council for the Order. Now this is where we end up having a little bit of fight going on. The argument is about whether to also investigate the rebel activity that is occurring in the same area as where the Lycans were found. Percival, feeling that there may be some sort of connection. And it's a point of tension for sure. Leads to a little bit of arguments between Sir Percival and the leader of the Order. There's some back and forth, but ultimately the desire for the Order to take active action in this Whitechapel area is shut down. And this kind of paints the picture that Sir Percival is a rebellious spirit amongst this group, and that he's not always keen on what the Order decides to do. This section is also where you get to meet a few characters of note and understand a few relationships. You meet Lord Hastings, and you also meet Sir Lucan, who is the adopted son of the High Chancellor. And he's also Lady Ingrid's brother, who is also adopted by the Chancellor. Now, Lucan kind of seems like a bit of a douche, but he also is somewhat cool, as he basically allows your little band to try to investigate the Whitechapel areas anyway, despite the High Chancellor's order. From here, though, it's time to gear up, and who better to be your quartermaster than Nikola Tesla himself?
Permit me to oversee a few of my new experiments. In the meanwhile, take a look around. Play with whatever strikes your fancy. But do be careful.
And did you see that spin move? Dang. Now, Tesla's lab does have some pretty cool gadgets, and you get to explore it for a little while, and it made me excited to think, what type of gadget am I going to get right now? And guess what it is? Nothing. You get absolutely nothing. But he does show you something that you are going to get eventually, right? So that's gotta be cool, right? Wrong. It's a DC AC converter that allows you to basically override electrical doors. Cool, sure, but like, come on, give us something crazy like that arc gun that we barely got to use. This thing is sort of just there to help you solve little puzzles to help you open up doors, so it's not really a part of the main action and not something that really makes gameplay more fun. It's a little bit lame and a little bit of a missed opportunity, to be honest. But you do get to test out a sniper rifle, which is pretty fun to use, although something that you're not given right away. Now at this point, your band goes to investigate the area, and you split up with Lafayette to investigate, and you roam around the streets for a bit, doing some of the slow walking and doing the classic wall shimmy that we see in all these AAA games. And you get to another section where you get to pick a lock, which is another kind of door opening puzzle where you need to rotate your joystick until you see part of the lock that can be picked. The lockpick leads to a brothel, and this is where you see rebels coming for you, so you hide upstairs and escape up on the rooftops, doing some climbing as the rebels are looking for you. There's some of this that I got a little lost on. I'm kind of one of those gamers who needs a little bit of yellow paint, but eventually I found my way, and you're doing some climbing to escape. Now, after all this walking, we finally get just a taste of action, which leads to more walking. But then finally, you do get a sustained section of gunplay. Now, gunplay does feel a little bit sparse in this game. It's like the main focus of this game was just making sure to tell a compelling story, and gunplay very much seems secondary. And even though you do get to try out a few new guns throughout the game, mostly you're doing a lot of the same cover-based shooting, popping in and out with not a ton of changes as to what that action looks like. I did enjoy the gunplay though, and there are some change-ups to the action in this section, which is a bit hard as they basically start sending you these shotgun rushing tryhards who try to pressure you to make a move while you are in cover. The main thing you got to do though is just make sure to take them out as soon as you can, and you can basically take your time with the others, although there are also people who will throw bombs at you, and while you can throw these back, I didn't quite realize that yet, so you got to be careful because I did let one of these take me down. Another thing to note though is that when you are down at super low health, you end up crawling on the floor, and the only way you can heal yourself is to drink what's called black water, and this will end up bringing you back up and into fighting shape. After this and some more careful shooting though, we finally defeat the enemies And as we move to the next section, this is where you do get some cart pushing in that classic Uncharted way. Pushing a cart with a buddy to allow you to get to a higher elevation. And as we get back up to the rooftops, we use our monocular where we can find Lady Ingrid and Percival. And we also request some aerial support from some of these blimps. And you get to send a bit of Morse code to the ship to confirm your location and confirm that you need help. And this is another one of those weird kind of one-off mechanics because I don't think we ever send Morse code again in this game. Now, typically in a game like this, you want to introduce a mechanic that gets used semi-often, and then you layer on more complexity on top of that mechanic to make it more fun. Well, fortunately, the Morse code wasn't really that fun, so I don't really care that they didn't use it again, but when you're introducing these types of mechanics, you kind of want them to be a part of the game, so I kind of just feel like they shouldn't have really bothered with this. From here, we're going to meet up with the gang, and we bump into a fun little Easter egg. You find this little Sackboy doll, giving that little bit of PlayStation representation. Now we fight our way there, and I can't see shit over this cover to see who is shooting, and so I just jump down, and this is where you actually get into a quick time fight scene. And it has this one little slow-mo part where you need to use your camera joystick to quickly find an angle for attack. But this is one of those very infrequently used mechanics that we only see like once before, much earlier in this game. And so I'm completely lost forgetting what I'm supposed to do in this situation. So I fail the first time, but I do figure it out for the second time. And we meet up with Percival and company. Now, one thing I haven't mentioned yet, but it's kind of interesting, is every character essentially has two names. They kind of have their order name, which is using a name of a famous British figure like Sir Galahad, of course, which is basically his knight name. His real name is Gray, and they don't really explain this in the game, but you do see oftentimes a character of the order is introduced as one name, but they continually call them another. There's Sir Galahad, whose real name is Gray. There's Sir Percival, whose real name is Sebastian Mallory. There's Lady Ingrid, who goes by Izzy, and Lafayette's first name is Marquis. He isn't yet a knight, so he doesn't have a name just yet. They mention King Arthur as well, and it's safe to assume that that's not his real name. Now, it's at this point that we get a thermite gun, which will be very fun for the next section. Now, this gun is one of those high-tech guns that we've been waiting to properly use, and they actually let us use it this time for a good sustained period. With this gun, you can fire this thermite grit with the R2 button, and this basically shoots out a flammable cloud that you can then follow up with an igniting bullet, which lights that entire area up. It's actually really fun to use and really fun to fight through this section using this gun. Something that I wish this game would let us do more often, as this was much more of the promise of this game. This is kind of a lot of the things that we would see in those preview trailers, is using cool high-tech guns in 19th century Victoria, England. We fight with a thermite rifle, and it can also be used to blow open some blocked pathways, which give it a little bit of an extra nice use. But eventually we get to where we thought the rebels would be, at a hospital, but we actually see a bunch of lichens, and the blimp that we called earlier is there. And so we signal it to do something. I'm not quite sure what it does, but it seems like it shoots off a bit of an EMP pulse because they ended up having to turn their equipment off. This essentially gives Gray and Izzy a window to get to the hospital using the tunnels. And you get a lantern for this section as it is dark. There's a little bit of fighting through the tunnels, but eventually you get to the hospital and end up having to search through the basement. And that's where you run into this lichen, which is essentially going to turn into a boss fight. The Lycan chases you down the hallway in a cinematic fashion as you escape and fire at him and struggle to get away. It is a fun section, but it is very much on rails as you do need to play this out exactly how the developers want you to. Eventually though, you chase him away temporarily until you seem like you're almost safe, meeting up with Izzy again, only for him to catch you and fight you to the end. This ends up being a quick time boss fight. Now through this section, you basically have to utilize the joystick to dodge the attacks. And you have your knife as your main weapon to swing at the Lycan in between each attack. This takes a little bit of getting used to, but ultimately this is a bit of a rote, repeated pattern that you just need to get into where you just press the buttons timely and it will get you through until the Lycan nearly kills you and knocks you out, leaving Izzy fighting him quite unsuccessfully. Gray eventually though comes to and you get to sneak attack this bad boy from behind with an axe, taking him out for good. At this point, you tend to the wounded Izzy and carry her out, as it seems for a bit that she might be dying. At this point, it seems like she's actually even going to confess her feelings for Gray, but they get interrupted by an escaping rebel. Izzy is weak, but seems to be recovering, and so you lay her down on a hospital bed to recover while you check out what the rebels have been up to in this area. Now here we have a very boring section of just searching through the hospital room for clues. Ultimately, after searching though, you just go back to Izzy, and basically we find that the clues indicate that there is a threat to the United India Company. Now we meet up with Tesla, who has brought some goodies for you. Yes, this is awesome, right? Oh, he's just giving you that DC AC converter thing. Oh, but then another weapon. Yes, some cool revolver. Oh, you're just gonna give that to Sir Percival. What the fuck? Okay, well, at least we did get a secret bag, so maybe there is something cool, but come on, I want him to give us the cool stuff. Okay, so the plan of attack is to get atop the blimp and stop a rebel attack. And this brings us to an epic scene where the team gets to rappel from one blimp down to another in order to sneak aboard. The section is beautiful, but most of what you're actually doing in terms of gameplay is moving the joystick and hitting the X button to repel. There's nothing to really threaten your entry here, no epic set piece moment like you would have with Uncharted. It is a sight to behold, but soon you are just inside the blimp and, well, there's no longer any more of these epic sky views or opportunities for a while at least. At this point we are infiltrating the blimp, so stealth is the only way forward. And it's one of those forced stealth sections, so when you come up upon an enemy, there is a window of time that you can perform a stealth action. And you have this stealth circle that closes, and once it gets inside of a triangle, that means you can hit the prompt to properly stealth. If you don't do this right, they will catch you. And I will say I do like the cinematic takedowns that occur when you do this. Stealthing a little bit more, you actually end up taking the ship over and you leave Marquis to steer it while you head stealthily to the ballroom. Now, one of the hard things that I notice in trying to stealth through these sections is the game is so zoomed in. It can be pretty hard to actually see around yourself in order to see any enemies that might be nearby in order to sneak properly. Regardless though, it's not really that hard. There's not that many enemies that you run into and they kind of have some pretty predictable paths. Oftentimes when you get to them, their back is already to you, so it wasn't too bad. Eventually though, you get to the ballroom where Lord Hastings is there as well as Sir Lucan, and Lord Hastings is being targeted by the rebels, so you need to protect him, and you pull out what Tesla has provided you in that bag, which is the sniper rifle you got to test earlier. Now this is a cool part. You start by inspecting the room with your scope to try to find out who might be an imposter. And once you do discover who those are, you have to take them out before they get to Hastings. I like this part. Once you've taken these guys out, more enemies come for you and you get to snipe some more. Again, a nice section where when you get a new weapon to hold, you get to actually use it. One thing that, again, I have to mention is frustrating is not being being able to see over the cover. And it's especially hard when you have to switch to a zoomed in scope in order to get on target. But still fun. I love sniping sections in games, so I'm glad this was here. Take the rebels out, and then you chase the last couple who are getting away with a very mini chase sequence. But soon you are diverted to help the people escape from this blimp through these hot air balloons, which get violently dropped out into the sky, which is kind of funny and jarring to watch, but hope everyone's okay. At this point, you have to fight the remaining rebels around the blimp, firing through the kitchens, and you're doing this with Percival, but in classic Uncharted or The Last of Us fashion, when you try to squeeze through this damaged section, the rubble collapses and separates you from each other. So now you need to split up. You continue fighting, and you get to one of the hardest sections of this game, because now they send out this shotgun tryhard, but he also has armor and a fire shotgun. And this is so freaking hard. I got taken out multiple times by this guy, but eventually I found that if I use a bomb and then just try to pump everything into him as fast as I can from a distance, ultimately this worked. And he was the only really tough enemy to deal with. Once you take him out, everyone else is easy. Now, did I think to actually pick up that fire shotgun for myself? No, I didn't. Finally, you catch up with Percival on the bridge with a rebel who has a bomb, and ultimately, even though he tries to talk him out of it, the rebel decides to blow himself and the ship up, taking the blimp down to the ground. Now, this is a very confusing section for me that doesn't make much sense, because while I guess when you do see the explosion, it ends up blowing Galahad back inside the ship instead of outside on the bridge, you don't see the crash, but you wake up in the flaming remains on the ground. Honestly, I don't see how you even remotely survived this crash. And I don't know how anyone else like Izzy and Lafayette were able to get off the ship in time. And also, Percival was outside during the explosion, so he would clearly fall to his death, right? And yeah, Percival is dead, but he is very much intact and very easily found. Not what you would expect from someone who fell out of the sky, or alternatively got taken out by an explosion. I'm quite confused, but moving on. Once you get out, the council is now meeting for the funeral of Sir Percival and the knighting of the new Sir Percival, Lafayette, who will assume his name now that he is knighted. But shortly after, it's time to get in trouble for disobeying the Chancellor's command. And after just a few seconds earlier honoring Mallory, he ends up getting disgraced by the Chancellor, who sounds like a police chief in a buddy cop movie.
Chancellor, I must...
Public buildings destroyed. Innocent citizens placed at risk. Incalculable damage done to United India Company property. It is only by the mercy of Providence that an even greater disaster was avoided. All this while not a single rebel was taken into custody.
As that was Galahad's friend and mentor, Galahad gets very angry, and ultimately you can see that he is going to be seeking vengeance for Sir Percival's death, whether that means following orders or not. And as things are getting heated between the two, the Order is made aware on another attack on Lord Hastings by the rebels. The knights have been called to action to protect him. Now, what proceeds is perhaps the best action that occurs in all of the game. As you go to try to rescue Hastings, you get the arc gun to finally use for real this time without so much of a tease like you got last time. And I enjoy this gun for sure. Even try-hard shotguns go down quickly with this thing. Now, you fight your way further through the streets until you finally get to Hastings' carriage to rescue him. At this point, the mission would be complete, but Gray is a madman seeking pure revenge for the death of his friend. He continues on to take out more and more of the rebels. So you deal with a lot more of these enemies, and you even have to deal with a few shotgun tryhards here and there, but ultimately you fight your way further into the bridge until you have to face a rocket launcher guy. And after taking him out, you now get to take his rocket launcher from him, and you can begin chucking rockets at anyone who dares come close. This is a very epic and fun part to play, and overall this whole sequence of events is the kind of thing I just wish this game had more of, using the cool futuristic guns to tear shit up. But even blowing up half the bridge isn't enough for Galahad. He is going to find the rebel leader now, and he ends up beating the last living guy to a pulp, interrogating him until he finally admits that the leader is in Whitechapel. Meanwhile, throughout this whole time, most of the knights are telling him to stand down, but Galahad don't care. He is going rogue at this point. Now, Galahad heads to the bar and brothel where the rebels have been hiding, and he beats the shit out of everyone in his path. And he's also doing a lot of yelling.
Landlord! A drink! A drink, goddamn you!
And drinking. This dude is falling apart. But then he meets who he thought was the rebel leader, Devi, only to find out that it is actually not her. The leader is actually Lady Lakshmi, and she comes down to calm everyone down, promising to explain to Galahad that things are not as they seem.
Things are not as they seem.
Galahad is not fully convinced, but he's convinced enough to give them a chance to provide him the proof that Lord Hastings is evil, that the United India Company is evil, and that the Order has been duped. So he agrees to go to the docks, but first we'll need to don some civilian clothes as the Order cannot be seen publicly taking part in this. Now this whole thing is being seen from a distance by Izzy, who now thinks that Galahad is bad, essentially. Now I don't know, but these two were close for a while, and he saved her life from the Lycan. Galahad clearly also loved Sir Percival, so I don't know why she is very quick at this point to kind of assume the worst out of Galahad, assume that he has bad motives, but perhaps some of this stems though from Izzy's jealousy, as she does see Galahad with another woman. Either way, this is a big turning point for this whole will they, won't they story. Now I will say this, I don't think I've said this yet, but for the most part I have to say the story is a bit lacking for me. It's been a bit dry up until this point. But honestly, after Galahad starts going rogue, I end up getting a little bit more invested because there's actually an active mystery afoot and Galahad is showing more emotions, whether they're crazy or not. Now, this isn't a total saving grace, but it does redeem this otherwise boring story so far for me. From here, you go with Lady Lakshmi as she leads you to show the proof. And this initial section by the train yard has a lot of Uncharted and The Last of Us moments. You're shimmying through the rubble together, you're pushing carts to open up a new path, and you're boosting Lakshmi over the fence to let you in from the other side. Pretty standard Naughty Dog type stuff. This brings you to a section where you have to avoid a sniper, and so you have to slowly make your way there. Fighting goons, fighting a shotgun tryhard, actually getting to play a little bit with a thermite rifle again, until ultimately you arrive at the sniper's location and stealthily take him out, grabbing the sniper and then using it to protect Lady Lakshmi down below in the streets. This part is very reminiscent of the sniper section in The Last of Us, of course. One thing that does annoy me is at the end of this section when things seem pretty safe and over and I'm into a cutscene, pretty well into a cutscene, this guy creeps behind me and I'm totally not expecting that the game is going to give me control of anything at this point, but there is a quick time button press and I don't see that, and so he just kills me. Get through that the correct way this time, and then we get to some safety where we meet up with Devi, who, well, I really wonder how she got there so easily because we just had to fight half of London in order to get here. But anyways, we continue on to the docks. I will say the sniper section was mostly fun, and at this point the story is also getting more interesting. Obviously the game is just gorgeous, so I start to realize this game does have what it takes to be great. Ready at Dawn clearly had in mind what some of the right ingredients were in order to try to put this game together in a quality way. They clearly studied what was working with some of these other games at Naughty Dog and Uncharted, and you can see a lot of what was put into God of War with this, and so Sony Santa Monica's help also can be seen here. I think parts of the problems with this game though is that even though it has a lot of the right parts, there are just elements that feel a bit disconnected. Like all the pieces are here, just maybe not put together in the best ways. There's sections where the pacing feels off. There's sections where you are out of the action for too long and spending too much time picking things up and grabbing them. There's cutscenes that get in the way and even take away too much control of the character, and there's not enough freedom in the gameplay. There's also not a whole lot of super epic moments. Uncharted's epic moments have these set pieces where Drake is doing some crazy things like falling out of an airplane. The Last of Us is more grounded, a little bit more like this game, but the story is where it really shines, and the gameplay, of course, is much more realized. When playing this game and I get to a section like this that I mostly enjoyed, it's just a reminder that with just a little bit of tweaking and maybe adding some sort of something a little bit more special to this game, this really could work and could really make for a great franchise. We will get back to that later though. For now, we need to get to the warehouse to see the proof that we have been waiting to get to. From here, Lady Lakshmi tells Devi that she needs to go. So I'm sure she won't pop up again later, disobeying those orders, but also somehow again meet up with us after we take out the other half of London. I'm sure that's not gonna happen. Okay, so after fighting more on the dock, we get into a little warehouse and we find these crates with the United India Company insignia on them. Revealed inside these boxes is the presence of living vampires. And Lady Lakshmi reveals that actually Lord Hastings is a vampire that's been preying on girls at night and is actually the one responsible for the Ripper murders. He's basically Jack the Ripper. So Galahad and Lady Lakshmi decide to burn down the warehouse and all the vampires with it. But as they're doing this, goons come attacking them, so they have to take them out. Once they do, it's time to go, but I guess they kind of forgot to make sure they had a way to get out because the door is locked. Oh, and now werewolves are coming for them too, so they're kind of screwed. But you fight them, and Devi, who I swear has like a Metal Gear Solid levels of stealth, arrives to save your ass. At this point, Galahad has to tell the Order about the conspiracies afoot, but the Chancellor is tired of his foolishness, and he just denies his request for the Order to support any part of this. Gray is frustrated, but he talks to Lucan, who begrudgingly decides he will help him get more proof and break into the United India Company mansion. Maybe Sir Lucan isn't such a douche. Alright, so in order to break in, they're gonna go in with stealth. And so they equip these crossbows with silent bolts. As you try to break in, you're able to shoot a wire with the crossbow that you can then zipline down. And then there is some cool stealth as you have to crossbow enemies guarding the grounds. You definitely have to stay in stealth though, otherwise you fail this whole mission. I actually enjoyed this stealth section, especially getting to use the crossbow was pretty fun. But soon you get through that and you and Lucan are joined by Lady Lakshmi. A bit of a fight breaks out between the rebels and Sir Lucan, but Gray assures Lucan that they are cool. Regardless, they have to keep fighting because now their cover has been blown. And so after some action taking these guys down, things slow down a lot. There's a slow-ass section where you have to search a bunch of drawers for something. Honestly, I don't even remember what it was, and honestly, it doesn't matter. Finally, though, you arrive at Lord Hastings' quarters, who somehow didn't hear all the gunfire going on, and he's just there chilling in vamp mode, sucking blood out of his latest victim. But he's caught red-handed now by Galahad and Lady Lakshmi, and well, Lucan actually double crosses Galahad. The whole time he was on Hastings' side. Wow, he really is a douche. And Hastings ultimately admits that yes, he is Jack the Ripper. Now at this point there's a struggle and there's a quick time event where you need to chuck a knife at Lord Hastings to save an escaping Lady Lakshmi. And you and Lucan end up in a fight. A little bit of a quick time event and then you chase him down, but then Lycans are sent after you. After you defeat them, you get into a little bit more of a fight with Lucan, but everything is stopped when Izzy arrives along with Lafayette, and they make sure to stop you. I mean, these are apparently your best friends in the Order, and they just do not seem to have your back at all. Even more so when Galahad is brought in for sentencing among the Order, and like everyone votes for you to go to prison and be sentenced. Galahad is just not given any benefit of the doubt at all, which is kind of ridiculous for all of his service to the Order. At this point, we already know what happens because it all occurred at the very beginning of the game. Galahad is in prison for a bit, but he ends up escaping by jumping off the bridge. From here, though, he is saved by Tesla, who keeps him in hiding and tends to him along with Lady Lakshmi. This part sort of reminds me of when Joel almost died in The Last of Us. And it takes a while, but after some time, Galahad starts recovering and is ready for action. Now him and Lady Lakshmi need to escape the area, as the Order is on to his whereabouts. and Izzy is leading the charge in tracking him down. She is so intent on getting Galahad. It's crazy how much of a 180. She just seems evil now. It's weird how much she just doesn't seem to trust him. But so Galahad and Lady Lakshmi escape, and they get to the bar and brothel for a bit, but Galahad wants to save Tesla, as Lucan will likely be there to get him, especially since he helped Galahad, and so he heads towards the palace to get him. On his way though, he sees Lafayette, who says he's watching him, but he believes that he is probably fighting for a just cause, so he lets him go. At least Galahad seems to have one sort of friend. But so Galahad heads to the palace and fights his way there versus a lot of enemies, and it's clear we are in the end game. Eventually though, you reach Tesla, and as expected, Lucan the douche is there, and you fight to the death. Now, they started hinting strongly at this after you discovered Lord Hastings was a vampire, but Lucan is actually a Lycan. Yes, he is Lucan the Lycan. And so you have to battle him down in a quick time battle, which is pretty much the same as the other Lycan fight you faced earlier on the game. And that's kind of lame. There's not really much of a difference here. But ultimately, if you hit the right buttons, you end up winning. Now, Lucan the Lycan isn't dead, but he is very much weak. And at this point, the Chancellor comes in and sees his son and realizes Galahad knows. The Chancellor explains that after wiping out a group of Lycans years ago, Lucan the Lycan was a child, he was left fatherless, and the Chancellor didn't want to hurt a child, and so he decided to raise him instead. At this moment, he debates saving his son and finishing off Galahad, but ultimately he decides to let Galahad finish the job. The Chancellor recognizes that if anyone finds out about this, the order will crumble, and so he makes Galahad promise not to say anything. He'll let him go, but he has to banish him from the order. There is a little bit of a tacit recognition here that Galahad will still somehow be fighting on the right side, just not as a knight of the order. He's the hero London needs, but not the one it deserves. This part is actually very much Dark Knight Batman energy, with the Chancellor kind of being in that Commissioner Gordon role and Galahad being the Batman. But at this point, the game ends as you slowly ready your weapon and fire it at Lucan the Lycan. Triggers the credits, but guess what? That's not all. To make it even more Batman-like is the post-credits sequence, with Tesla communicating to Galahad, letting him know that the city is on high alert, and Galahad peers into the dark London streets, being all badass and staying around to fight. He's no longer Galahad, he's no longer a knight, but he's still fighting the fight. This part actually heavily seems to allude to a sequel, The Order 1887 or beyond. Now, before I talk that, let's talk about this experience as a whole and what my thoughts are. I will say that ultimately I do agree with some of the critics' sentiments. I think the gameplay should have been more of a focus here. I was largely unenthusiastic about the story until the end, and I didn't like how often this game tried to limit your freedom. But unlike the critics, I actually liked the length of the game. Definitely not for $60, but I was satisfied with the length of this experience. It's funny, I wonder if this game had come out for something like $40 at the time, maybe the entire story of it would have changed. I also think, as far as this game goes, there needs to be a little bit more respect given to how this game actually helped propel the third-person narrative genre forward and into the PS4 generation. Even though this game was inspired by the likes of Naughty Dog, this entry helped advance those types of stories and bring new things into this generation. It showed how beautiful games could be. It even was one of the first with these seamless cutscenes. In some ways, The Order 1886 walked so that Uncharted 4 and God of War and The Last of Us Part 2 could run. And when you look to even PS5 games coming out this day, few rise to the level of beauty and quality that is The Order 1886. It's a flawed game for sure, but the concept is great. And by the end of this game, I wanted so much to experience another entry in this story. One that could address the criticisms of the first game, but also reach its true potential. To me, The Order 1886 is kind of like the first Uncharted game. Uncharted Drake's Fortune proved some concepts and set the stage for what would become the masterpiece that is Uncharted 2. I feel like The Order could have gone down a similar path. But will this game ever get a sequel? Well, it's unfortunately very unlikely. The developers at Ready at Dawn moved on from this series to start making VR titles, and they were eventually bought by Facebook. Now, the Order IP is owned by Sony, so another team under that umbrella could take this on. But it's actually hard to see which of the teams would opt to further this IP when they might have the option to create their own. I don't see the likes of Naughty Dog or even a Santa Monica who helped make this game opt to take this on when they have their own similar things going on right now. That being said, I want a sequel so bad, especially after finally giving this one a go and with how it ends. You can imagine if they got things right that there would be this epic gameplay with even more futuristic steampunk tech. You'd be fighting werewolves and vampires, and maybe even having to face down other members of the Order. I just feel where things left off, there's so many interesting angles that this could have gone. And so it's sad to think that probably it won't happen. But where does The Order 1886 sit on the ultimate video game tier list? For me, after all the good and the bad, I think it belongs as a B. Does a lot of things right, does a good amount of things wrong, but it's definitely worth a play, especially if you can get it on sale. But let me know what you think, and I want to say a special thank you to my YouTube members for joining the Bowel Movement. I hope you liked this video. I certainly liked making it, but otherwise, so long, Pooper Troopers.